Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Minister for being here. I know your heart is in this work, and I do appreciate the budget naming the problems of gender equality, but I'm so sorry that the concomitant action of naming those problems isn't there. We don't see funding for pay equity legislation and implementation. We had the grassroots alternative budget request investment in a national action plan to end violence against women and to make this investment proportionate to the cost and consequence of gender-based violence. Their recommendation was $500 million a year and that it fund uniform access to domestic violence support, prevention, courts, sexual assault, crisis centers, all of it. And instead, we ended up with $100 million over 5 years only. And we know the cost of domestic violence is $12 billion. So, I know we're going to get a chance to talk about this more, but I just need to say I wish there was more oomph. We've been hearing a lot in the context of our economic justice for women study that this committee is doing about the benefits of a good childcare system, and we heard this every day last week at the United Nations, where I was very glad to be part of your delegation. Every expert here has been saying if we invest to get strong childcare system, then we can get more women to work who want to be, and we had Professor Pierre Fortin just on Tuesday say for Quebec that their childcare model generated $900 million in revenue just by virtue of mothers getting to work. But in this budget, there's not a penny of funding for childcare for this coming budget year, and the budget increases funding by only $5 million between 2019 and 2020, and then there's no increase in 2021 and 22. We had the Childcare Advocacy Association of BC say that they thought a budget commitment of $7 billion over 10 years is far below what's required to develop a system, and the CCPA budget, they called for 1% of GDP, and this is apparently an international measure that they called for $600 million this year and then $1 billion more every year in the future until that 1% threshold is met. So can you talk with me about why the budget isn't on track to meet that 1% of GDP spent on childcare, that being the new standard for developed countries?
Madam Chair, I want to thank my colleague for joining us in New York and for all the ways that she's worked to advance gender equality in Canada under different governments and different value systems. Pay equity, as you know, there was a committee of the House that did really great work around pay equity, and the government's on board. I know some members of that committee are around this table, and my colleague, Minister Haidu, and I are committed to making sure that the legislation that we introduce in 2018 is thoughtful. We know that it's a complex issue that's going to have various consequences, much of which are going to be positive, but we need to make sure that we get it right, and that's what we're committed to. And I know that it will be transformative, the work that we do. As far as the violence against women focus with the gender-based violence strategy, we know that there are provinces and territories out there. You were there for the presentation at the UN with our colleague from the Yukon. We know that some of the provinces and territories are leading the way, that they've had to step up and take the lead. And they're doing really good work, and part of what the strategy that we will be working on together, part of what it will allow us to do is to work with them, to learn from them, and to share those best practices around the country. But we know that over and over again, what we heard across the country, what you've heard, is that the federal government plays a really important role in coordinating its own services across departments. Right now, as we've walked in, there's a silo effect happening where different departments are working towards the same noble goal, but those efforts aren't always coordinated. And we're going to be getting our own house in order. I think that's really important. But we also know that the government can play a critical role, and we heard this over and over again from stakeholders in data collection. and gathering the evidence that is so badly missing right now. And this evidence, this focus on research in this center of excellence, sharing best practices across the country, a one-stop shop, if you will, is going to be laying the foundation for the work that we have to do to get to that place where no woman or girl or anyone of different genders has to struggle with gender-based violence. And there's a lot of work to do. But I know that that $100 million isn't the only way that we're going to address and prevent gender-based violence. The investment that you saw, the $11 billion in housing, is going to be fundamental. We know that one of the reasons women, for example, don't leave abusive relationships is the fear of losing that safe roof over their heads. The childcare focus, I know that it's not everything, but $7 billion over 10 years is significant, and it's going to make a
With respect, though,
positive
Minister,
impact.
it doesn't start for 2 years. So this is, we don't want to see this as part of the re-election platform. We want to see the result right now.